Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Match Point Podcast. I'm Aliossz, being joined by Sirius, and this is going to be our first episode of hopefully a few. And if we're keeping track, it's also the third or fourth attempt I've made at a podcast, depending on how you want to count it. But this is the second one to get an actual episode recorded, so that's pretty good odds.
Hey, it's already a better start than before. So, it's progress.
It's progress, for sure. So like I said before, I'm being joined by Sirius, who recently got the call up to T2 and also has my favorite background out of any of the casters because it's just Legos. And if
Hey,
you've
yep.
if you've had Twitch chat open during an element game, you probably see me type some variation of "Get Sirius out of the way. I want to see the Legos." So
Shit, I'll move out of the way right now.
yeah,
Okay,
let's
there it
just
goes.
have like your Lego background and like a disembodied voice, just like off
I
screen.
there's the thing in Discord where you can just have a background, so I'll just
Oh yeah,
need to set it as that, and I just move out of the way.
yeah,
It's just that. So
yeah.
I will figure something out.
It's
But
a favorite
either way,
feature of mine, just is that my background is Weezer. But anyways. There are a couple things I want to go over. First of which, Xenon finished, I believe, about a week ago, and it had some pretty interesting storylines. We're not going to take like a super detailed, like granular look at a lot of the matches individually because that's just kind of unnecessary. But there are some broader things we want to go over. Like for me, with like the big storyline was a lot of T2 teams having roster woes that they didn't really figure out in time. So we saw a lot of kind of T3 teams get an edge over them, like the Speak Karn and Co,
yeah,
which I
that's
never thought I would say in my life. And the first game I casted was Thrive 7-0 in Karn and Co on Cafe. So there was a lot that happened that we can kind of talk about without having to go into like super specifics, I think.
yeah, there was definitely a lot of very interesting results, even with me just kind of being a passive observer for Xenon this time around. But just overall, a lot of unexpected and very expected results, considering that Makers going off of already winning Element 3 the last time around, beating everybody. I don't even think they dropped a single map the entire time while playing in Xenon, and then just being the dominant force that they are. But then, yeah, so many things like Ariel still not qualing up into playoffs or even play in at that point. It's so many unexpected results from pretty prominent teams in tier 2, tier 3, and it's just I don't know what to expect at this point. It's kind of just been a curveball in this last off season in between element seasons.
Yeah, I do think part of it's because of the timing of Xenon, because it happened
Yeah,
like
that's
immediately preceding Element 3. And a lot of times you'll
mhm.
see like teams will make roster changes because they kind of think they could find some pieces that work better, or players will go look for different teams because they don't like where they're at. Like we saw Mike W leave Ariel Rise pretty much as soon as they were out of playoffs contention in Element 3. But then that also happened to coincide with Pro League teams looking to round out their rosters. So, like in phase 3 of Element, we saw Carnico lose Spiff to Wildcard pretty immediately, which really hurt them for that season.
Oh yeah.
Or like Bay went from SSG Academy to Wildcard, and then like Kobe to DZ, which we'll kind of talk about those a little bit later. But just those two things combined, just like really gave a lot of teams a very awkward start to like that season. And with
Mhm.
teams like Ariel, they just never really figured it out.
Yeah, no. Especially Karn & Co coming off the back of just losing Spiff before phase 3 even started, because they were looking pretty damn good going into phase 3. They had done pretty well. I want to say they ended off actually I'm going to go check right
It
now.
was 3-2.
But
I
it was
they
3-2.
Yeah,
So
they beat
they
Wildcard
again they
Aces to
kind
get
of
in.
struggled like they did element 2 to actually secure their spot playoffs and further beyond. Granted, they couldn't really get to playoffs this time because, well, they kind of struggled immensely after losing Spiff. He was kind of seemingly their backbone the entire time throughout that element season, most recently. So it's kind of sucks to see him go in the way that he did. But really helped out Wildcard in their season. Ultimately, didn't help them win the grand final, but still, it showed the kind of promises that he could bring to the roster like that and to Karn & Co when he was still there. But losing him clearly was a big problem. And then just moving on to Xenon itself, we've already seen Makers drop 2 players because of, like you said, losing Woos and Kobe to Pro League teams now. But still, bringing in players from other teams and still dominating in tier 3 the way they did is just absolutely incredible, and just goes to show that the system that they have built is phenomenal for them. So it's still expecting big things out of them, especially with major quals kind of going on this weekend and possibly next weekend. I can't remember exactly when they're all going down, but regardless, things for makers are looking up, whereas other teams still kind of need to figure out their roster woes, it would seem. I mean, I don't know what your take on that, Ali, is.
I mean, I think that like Baker's kind of figured it out, right? Like they didn't miss a
Yeah.
beat going into it. They picked up Adam and
Hmm.
Tristan. And Adam is a player that like we haven't seen on an entry role in a while, but that is kind of what he gained prominence as back when he was playing under Traw on Ozone's Windstorm roster back in the olden days when I was casting Genesis, if you know what that is.
Oh God,
Actually, I
yes.
believe when both of us were casting Genesis.
I had never casted Genesis. I coached in Genesis, but yeah.
That
But
I just
showing my age
forget.
with this.
Yeah, yeah.
Good God.
Um, but he's kind of back on that role, which I was a little bit iffy about at first, but it
Mhm.
has been working out very, very well for them, and he has kind of taken over that tip of the spear role that I didn't think they'd really be able to find a replacement for with how good Kobe was at it. But Ariel kind of had the worst end of the stick, I think, with the fact that Poison just like decided to like quit the game for a bit, and
Yeah.
replacing your IGL is one thing. Replacing your IGL while you're doing roster moves is an entire other thing because they lost Mike W, as I kind of said previously, and then they picked up Kiru, and then Poison left the team. So,
Yeah.
they moved like Kiru and Inrio to IGL, but then they had to build that system while also trialing their fifth, and it was just really awkward for them.
It clearly can be a big detriment to a team losing a big voice in that. I mean, they have a lot of prominent names on that roster, so you would think that maybe they'd be able to figure something out. Clearly not able to do it quite nearly as well with Poison still there. I mean, granted, recent seasons have shown that they're still struggling even if he was there, but still performing a bit better with him than without because I mean, like again, I've had a history of myself coaching a team, as I just mentioned, losing an IGL completely crippled that team, and we basically broke apart not too long after. So, I mean, not saying the Ariel's going to disband or anything like that, but I mean, that's kind of the thing that can happen if you lose a big voice in the factor of like Poison, who was the IGL for Ariel for so long now. I forget a time when he wasn't on that roster to begin with. I believe it was before SFCL season 7, I think, is before he really joined, if I remember correctly. I can't remember, but regardless, losing a person like that is going to really be rough, but then you still, at the end of the day, with a name like Ariel Rise under your belt, you kind of need to perform at the end of the day. And just right now, they still need to kind of figure that out, especially if they want to perform well in major quals and beyond.
Yeah, I'm interested to kind of see how they go because they did secure, I believe it was Epic as their fifth, so they do have
Mm.
like a concrete five in place, which allows Inrio and Kiri to kind of build that system up a little bit more. Um, there's another. Oh yeah, SG Academy. They didn't have as many early on, but like I said, they lost Bay to Pro League,
Yep.
and then they lost JetCon to him just kind of not wanting to compete at that level anymore. He went back to collegiate. And now they have Rampy, who they just kind of traded with Bay, which is a little funny. As well as Mike W, I think, was playing with them at the end of Xenon, and I believe he had the SSG tag, so it would kind of parse that he's on the roster. But
I would
they've,
imagine so.
yeah, they've kind of, I think they're probably like the second best off right after Makers as far as like roster changes for T2 teams.
Hmm.
I mean, you got Rampy, right, who is like a former SI champion, and he's been in Pro League basically since the dinosaurs walked the earth. So that's just a ton of experience to bring onto the team. And then Mike W is no slouch either, and they still have the org support of SSG. And I know at a time, like there was a time when like Callout would kind of pitch in sometimes during the off season to support SSG ACAD, and I'd imagine there's like still kind of something like that going on, even if he's not there day to day. Just having that support from like that kind of voice sometimes can really help to bring a system together.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's kind of funny in the same way is that Karn and Co also got vertical from the exact team that they lost a player to. So it's kind of twist of irony in both cases for them. But regardless, Rampy again, like you said, kind of just that big prominent name giving a big boost to an otherwise already good tier 2 team, but still not quite figuring it out, just kind of a little bit more recent, maybe not quite figuring things out. Still got pretty far, but going up against a really suddenly hot fluffy aimers who have just
Yeah.
it kind of exploded out of nowhere just the way they did. Because I mean, they got to grand finals in Wildcard Restart, they got to grand finals in Xenon, the most recent season. So it's kind of ridiculous about how well that they've exploded and really shut down what was looking like a very promising SSG academy. I mean, right, like I said, right behind Makers, I think were considered to be one of the top tier 2 teams currently, just because of the lack of overall firepower from everybody else dropping down from the prominent names we usually see in Element. But everybody else is just kind of like, okay, Fluffy Aimers, JJ Blast is kind of on top, right behind Makers, but still can't quite figure it out in a grand final yet. But considering that they're now suddenly looking very good, I would expect big things out of them. And hopefully, if they make it to another grand final, they'll be able to pick up a map.
Yeah, this was all just preordained, really. I think like it's been we've kind of talked a lot as a community about like how JJ was 0-4 in Element until this season. I actually got to cast his first ever Tier 2 win. Fun fact with Red Rogue
Oh, yeah.
inside of Element 2. So I'm now a part of Siege history. A very small part of Siege history, but you know, sometimes you gotta take what you can get. But yeah, actually, now that I kind of lied earlier when I said SSG kind of got the best out-of-season roster moves because like Emilio and Presided coming in for I forget who it was off the top of my head for Fluffy Hammers. It's been working out really well. They have a lot of good firepower, but also like enough kind of backbone and structure that they can like play around that and utilize it in a way where they can't just get like crushed when a structured team like SSG ACAD like tries to out-strategy them, and it has been very fun to watch and working very well, especially against Luminosity, which I'm sure it made a lot of people feel a little bit sad when it was an 8-round game on Nighthaven Labs.
Yeah, that I didn't get to really watch that like from the very get-go, but then I just heard the result after. I'm like, you've got to be kidding.
Dude, it was
Like those guys qual for EWC and then immediately lose to Fluffy. I mean, no disrespect, but I mean, just like you would have thought that Luminosity free win, absolutely, no question about it. But then picking up like you said, just Deity and or wait, no, sorry,
Emilio
Emilio
and
and
Recital.
Recited. It was Rice and Nick that they lost from Element, who picked up Emilio and Recited instead. So I mean, regardless, kind of unexpected. And then they just went on that monster run where they also beat Wildcard in their own tournament, which is insane. So I just like again, like two players who have not exactly like always performed at the highest level of caliber in any other tier 2 event. So it's kind of just insane that they picked those two guys up and then suddenly it's just, all right, we're one of the best tier 2 teams now. No question about it. It's like, okay, you guys barely did anything really in Element 3 as far as actually being able to get to playoffs. You missed it by a small margin against Thrive. And then suddenly you're now beating everybody and now made it to the last grand finals of the last two big really events in Siege outside of tier 2 and tier 1. So I mean, like, okay, sure guys, I don't know what you did, but certainly JJ is feeling great about it considering he's now dancing on camera about it.
I think my favorite part about like that run in Wildcard Restart is that like the first map, first Luminosity, 7-1 for Fluffy Hammers, right? Not even
Yep,
close.
not even
Second
close.
map, ties G2 versus Empire on Coastline for round count. Like
I it makes no sense and it's just like okay, we're here. I'm enjoying the ride. I'm not complaining. Like if out of everybody I would have expected to make it here, it wasn't JJ, but hey, I'm not going to argue about it. I mean, like
Mr.
we've always
Bones
loved
Wild
JJ.
Ride. Mr. Bones
Yep.
Wild Ride.
It's just the fact that we've been watching JJ for so long in so many different events and he's had so many good other players around him, but then suddenly he finally has the roster to actually perform well around him. And I think it was Irish that thinking Irish, another caster buddy of ours, who said it best in that he helps really enable a bunch of players who on other teams don't necessarily have the big numbers. I mean, they're really good players, but they aren't necessarily like the guys you immediately think of when you think of top fraggers. But then you take those guys, you put Deity and Rival in a situation where they can frag on fluffy aimers, and they are just excelling, doing so well in terms of the numbers. I think they were like some of the top performers in Element and Xenon. So I mean, just looking at those two in particular, it's just absolutely ridiculous what JJ has been able to do in the IGL role for Fluffy Aimers. So I mean, like, Clearly, this guy can lead a really good team. It just hasn't always worked in the past, but now finally he's getting the results that I think he's been expecting for a while, just never was able to get before.
Yeah, and I think kind of just speaking of like Didi specifically, that guy, I think if he's able to keep up what he's doing for like a little
Hmm.
bit longer, is probably like going to Pro League. Like he's like a tier 2 NJR sometimes. Like you'll see like a round where it's like, well, 5 versus 2, they have full vert control. It's just gonna be an execute, like, whatever team's gonna win. Oh, never mind, Didi just killed 3 guys. Alright, well, whatever. Like it is,
Sure.
if you're familiar with watching DZ, it's something that you've seen quite a lot where like a very hopeless round, suddenly NJR just like bursts out with his Superman cape and just kills 4 people and wins. Didi, I mean, he obviously is able to do it every round because like you're
Hmm.
supposed to lose those rounds, but there are a lot of rounds where he'll just kind of like pop out of nowhere and just like win them convincingly for fluffy aimers. And those types of players are a little bit of a rare breed. It's a little bit hard to find people that are like that type of clutch that consistently. And if he's able to continue doing that, I would imagine it's probably not long before pro league teams start taking a look at him. But speaking of fluffy aimers, though, there's been a kind of conversation sitting around them that I think would be interesting to go over about relegations
Hmm.
for Pro League. Because as we've talked about, they slammed 2 Pro League teams into the ground in Wildcard Restart. They
Yep.
beat both Luminosity and Wildcard, and it wasn't necessary. Like they were close games, right? Both went 3 maps. They did have to fight tooth and nail some maps, but they did beat 2 Pro League teams, and along with Makers beating Wildcard for the finals of Elements and Space Station beating Sonics. I'm gonna sneeze at some point. Um, there's been a conversation started about whether we should bring relegations back because there's a lot of genuinely great tier 2 teams right now that really could, even if they don't necessarily make it all the way through, really fight for it and force kind of the bottom pro league teams to step it up a little bit in order to kind of keep their spots, especially with teams like OG Beast Coast and OG Xset and Mirage and Stage 1 Los kind of being in the league. A lot of people, including myself, think that we'd kind of be better off if there was relegation, so those teams would have to really fight and earn their spot rather than just getting to keep it because they have the spot.
I mean, yeah, because I mean, it's always been a case, especially when relegations were still around. I mean, you have to really fight for those spots, and you can't just kind of like, oh, we can take it easy because we have the spot secured, which is kind of the way it is right now. Where I mean, it definitely feels like at least in NA, some teams have been kind of just riding the wave and not really taking very big shots at trying to make go for the title. Like we saw with Beast Coast, just picking up all the kind of just like I hate to say it, but misfits of the league before, and then winning a major because of that, like kind of bold decision to just go for the people that everybody just kind of overlooked, never even thought to think twice of. So going into relegations, bringing that back could see more teams try to do that same kind of thing. If it works, great, you won a major or won SI because of it. Awesome. If you didn't, oh well, you at least you tried to win something instead of just kind of just doing nothing in the league and then just kind of like still here because I mean, there's really no risk for you. I mean, that's kind of the big thing, and especially with the teams we've already mentioned, Makers, SSG Academy, and now Fluffy Aimers. There's definitely a case because we still don't even have full 10 team league in NAL right now. We're still missing one, so it's a 9 team league at the moment. Definitely a case for Makers, especially to take that 10th spot since they've already won the last 2 events that we can really think of in both the fact that they won Xenon, they won Element 3, didn't win Wildcard Restart, but to be fair, they're still dealing with roster issues at the time because they just lost 2 players. But regardless, they still went very far in that. So there's definitely the case that relegations, I think, should be coming back at some point because, I mean, like,
Oh yeah.
who does it really hurt besides the org? I mean, unless you're an org follower like me sometimes from back in the day, just you don't really care, especially if you're just a fan of the players themselves. I mean, it's just like you want to see your guy go into the league and perform well. That's all you care about. You don't necessarily care about, unless you're like crazy DZ supporter, for example, just trying to be going insane, figuring out what they're doing. We'll get into that later. But overall, just single tier from Aliossz. Hold
There
an
will be
F in
more.
chat. There will be more. It'll come. Anyway, like just thinking of that in the way that we have all these teams that are capable of possibly making it to Pro League, doing well in there, but we never get to see that chance because we're kind of locked into the system that we're at, and we have no real talking points from actual higher ups in Blast or Ubisoft trying to talk about this. So no idea what's going on there.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them back, because we did get SI quals back. It's no longer
we did get that
just
back.
like all points anymore. So I think there is a little bit of openness to it, but it would be a little bit awkward to do it in the middle of a stage, which I think is probably what's happening here.
If it
But
had to come, it'd probably come next year.
yeah,
I would
I would imagine that it's probably going to be like inviting like one of the top two teams to like Pro League for the 10th spot, and then adding relegations at the end of like next year's circuit, so they can kind of plan things in advance rather than like trying to do everything now. Which, you know, not rushing it's a good thing, I would say. But I think with relegations, right? Like one of the big arguments that I've tried to make for it is that I think more teams need to be willing to pull like a Beast Coast and say like this didn't work. It's just not working. What can we do to like make it work? And it worked for them, right? Obviously. But another one as well is that it just brings a better T2 scene. Like, if you want to go to Pro League, the only way you can do that right now is either you're the best Team 2 team for a long time, and which isn't going to happen because players are going to get poached by Pro League, like we've seen with Karnika after winning Element 1 and Makers after winning Element 3, or if, like, you get picked up to a pro team. And so, like, you know, you're kind of more incentivized if you really want to get there to build, like, a team like Envy where you can play entry and, like, everyone else enables you so your stats look really pretty.
Yeah.
And it also means that like players like Giddy, who are just like really solid role players, are just gonna get passed over till the end of time. Because that guy's played like 3 out of the 4 last like seasons of T2, with the last season of CL, Element 2 and Element 3, and he won CL, placed second in Element, and then won Element. Like, he is really, really good, but he doesn't like play something like a Packer or like a Kobe that'll be as obvious to fit in. And so he's just gonna get looked over till the end of time. And it's like Makers, right? We all wanted them to go to Pro League for the 10th spot, but like they're not gonna stick together because there's no guarantee that it even happens when we do get a 10th place team. And so it's like, you know, you could go to Dark Zero and play Hard Breach, and you can go to Luminosity and play the role that makes sense for you. Or you can stay on Makers and maybe possibly get the 10th place spot, right? Like, who knows?
I think that's a perfect segue into our next point about the players that did get moved up into tier 1 that we've already kind of briefly mentioned. Is just like, sure, yeah, this is kind of the system that we're in. Just you have to perform well enough that you'll get noticed by a tier 1 team, and then hopefully you get brought up, perform really well so you stick around and not just get immediately booted back down to tier 2 to prove yourself again. Like, we're already seeing that right now with some people who have already been up before, but then some newcomers like Kobe, Woos, and I believe Bay. So
yes,
overall, it's the kind of the same deal. So just going down the list of some of the people that have already been brought up that we've already mentioned. So Woos, currently on Luminosity, 1.10 rating, 11 for 15 KD, and 3-0 on entry. Like, not too bad, not like absurdly great or anything. It's just kind of like he's there, he's performing, doing his duties. No real arguments just yet. That's only been like 2 play days, so don't really have much to go off of. I mean, one of them has only played once, so just bear that in mind when I'm talking the stats so far. And then Bay, 1.07 rating, 20 for 17, and 1 for 1 on entry. But so far, I think he's the top performer on Wildcard currently. And I think he's another one that kind of feels like, even though it was a bit of a surprise that they dropped Rampy than the way they did, like very last second, by the way, still, I feel like that is a step in the right direction, considering that even in Element, they were going very slowly, very lackadaisical in a lot of their attacks. Spilf kind of helped put the pressure onto them being a bit faster and being a bit less lethargic. So now that they finally have a guy like Spiff and Bay to do stuff, they can kind of put the spearhead into their attacks. But so far for first 2 games, I don't believe it's worked at all. I mean, I don't think they're 0 for 2
right now, yeah.
They're 0-2 right now, but we'll see. It's still early, so still probably figuring some things out with the whole roster, but we'll get there. But then Spiff at the very end, we're including him in this category because he was in tier 2, but regardless, he was tier 1 before, so it doesn't fully count, but regardless, 0.59 rating, 10 for 20 on kill death ratio, and 2 for 6 on entry. So he is definitely having a rough first 2 games in the latest NAL stage. So something definitely needs to get figured out there if he needs to start performing, because they picked him up to, I think you said earlier before we even started, he's picked up to be the voice of the roster, but also he was one of the top fraggers in Element and on Carnico before they poached him. Essentially, poach probably isn't the right word, but regardless, was one of the top fraggers in that league, and then now he's not performing in the top echelon of performance, so it's kind of a bit rough on that end. And then we get to Kobe. Do I even need to say anything if you've actually watched that latest game? Because, oh good God. Kobe on Thermite, on Skyscraper. I mean, I don't think I need to go over stats. I don't think I need to. It kind of that just speaks for itself. I don't know what the idea is there.
It's been like a thing with DZ, like, for a while, that they're just afraid of entry players. Like, they did the same thing with Gavini. Like, you have, like, the most talented entry fragger, arguably ever, to come out of, like, T2 North America. Like, he is playing Terrorist Hunt in T2. Like, it's not even close. There's no one that's as good. They put him on Dokkaebi and Thermite, like, consistently, and then it doesn't work. And then Beast Coast picks him up and we're like, wow, wait, you play entry? We'll just give you Ashe then, man. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, hey, look, it's a major trophy. And then, like, DZ sees this and goes, Kobe, purebred entry, right? One of the most mechanically players that we've had in recent years.
Thermite.
I don't understand it. I granted, I'm not, like, part of DZ, so I can't, like, see the day-to-day, but, like, they're just... Why are you picking up entry fraggers if you don't want entry fraggers? Like, you could have picked up someone like Dream if you wanted a Thermite player. That guy had been LFT for a little bit, and he's phenomenal as a player. Or even someone like Packer plays Thermite. Like, you don't... Packer would have even argued it better because he can contribute to the calling as well, which after that last game, they very clearly need. Like, it just... Kobe was not who they wanted. It's so strange to me.
It's not, I don't even necessarily want to say it's like it's not who they wanted, because clearly they went out and got this guy because he is one of the best players in tier 2. Well, was one of the best players in tier 2 at the moment. So obviously you go pick him up because he's what has one of the best potentials in terms of talent. He can do a lot if you put him into the right environment. But we've seen time and time again with DZ that they just clearly do not have a clear idea of what they want to do with the new and upcoming talent. I mean, like, the last player that they really did that with was Pambazoo, and they just let him walk down Long Haul Clubhouse and just kill everybody with a Finka LMG, and it worked. It won them a major. And yet, they looked at that and said, you know what? We were cooking here. Let's never do it again. Let's never do it again.
We were cooking here, KFC tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't get it, because... Again, they should have learned this lesson with Gavini that, hey, maybe we should not have taken one of the best mechanically gifted players from tier 2, throw him onto a more support role, and just try to make him figure it out. Because clearly, it is not that easy for a guy that is supposedly just trying to get in, find a gap, get a couple of kills, create that space for your team, to then suddenly be a lot slower, a lot more methodical, in terms of just how he's going about the rounds, because he can't immediately die. It's like, okay, yeah, you went on Ashe or IQ, whatever. Like, okay, if you die, you die. It's whatever. It doesn't really impact the round. Now you put him on Thermite, where he can't die, and now he has to think a lot more. So I don't know what the idea is there, because I don't know if, like, Kobe on Makers was like a great calm guy. Like he's talking a lot and just trying to create that space with his team. Don't really know. Don't really talk to those guys often enough for me to know. But regardless, there's still the fact that you put a guy who is as good as he is and you put him on the complete wrong role, at least initially, it looks like we'll have to see in the next couple of play days because they could completely flip it around and then suddenly make it work. Don't know yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to struggle the way they performed on Skyscraper, because I mean, that was just rough.
So, as someone who spent years and years in the competitive trenches as a player and a coach and an analyst and just all of the above, people kind of tend to have different like strengths and weaknesses and tendencies, and typically you want to highlight the tendencies and the strengths they have within your system. Like that's why, like I brought up Gavini earlier, because when Fett picked him up for Beast Coast, without a second thought, it was this guy's going to be like the primary entry. That is what he does as a player. It's what he does best, and it worked really well. And then when they started losing in the middle of the or in the beginning of the season, they moved Diffuser to a second entry position because he's also a just natural entry. They tailored the system to what the players needed to succeed, and it won them a whole fucking major. And so we criticize like Dark Zero putting Gavini and now Kobe on Thermite because you're trying to take a player who has a very distinct play style and set of strengths and then throw all of that away because they didn't want Kobe for like if you want a Thermite player, you don't want Kobe. Like realistically, that's just not what he does. And that's not to say that he's inflexible or that he's a bad player, but we've watched Element, we've watched Xenon, we've watched TPL. We know what he does and what he's good at. And so they didn't want that. They wanted someone, at least on Skyscraper for the most part, to open walls and hold cuts. That's just not what he ends up doing, right? I don't want to focus entirely on him, though. One, because there are 4 players that we kind of highlighted, and also because I'm going to need to start drinking if we keep talking about Dark Zero at this rate. So I do want to kind of highlight the other player to get the call up from Makers, which is Woos, who has done a lot better. Like you said, he hasn't been lighting the scoreboards on fire necessarily, but he has been doing his job, and especially against Los, he looked really, really good. He was able to support the team in very good ways. He was also able to kind of bring out some of those some of that playmaking ability that we know he's got, even from that supportive role.
Yeah. I mean, 7-3 win against Los in their very first play day is like really, really good. So already just still, even though they lost their most recent game, still a lot of things looking right for them overall. I mean, he did pretty well in that first game too, going 7-6 over what on entry, but I mean, hey, everybody else still kind of did well. So kind of ignoring that. Overall, just kind of like riding the wave, just kind of doing his job, not really necessarily lighting up the scoreboard. I mean, seems more like Eddie is kind of doing that, at least in that very first game, that he was actually performing super well. So overall, you just kind of gotta look at him and say, hey, this is kind of, at least for the moment, looking like he's a bit more comfortable in his role, a bit more understanding of what he needs to do as a player, instead of just throwing him on a completely different role that's making him clearly very uncomfortable. So, I mean, already still hovering at a 1.0 KD through 2 games now. It's definitely to be as expected, because, I mean, there's still going to be growing pains coming in from tier 2 to tier 1. We've seen that constantly. I mean, there has been a very long time since a player has just come in straight from tier 2 to tier 1 and just excelled. I mean, Diffuser didn't even do that, and he won a major. So, I mean, it's going to take some time, but, I mean, Woos on Luminosity, I think, is definitely going to be a very good environment for him, at least for these first 2 games. No real complaints there. So, overall, just kind of just looking at Luminosity and just hoping that they can have an inkling of the same success that they had going into the EWC quals and then winning that, so they could actually, go to a big event for the first time in their overall, I think, history as an org. I don't really remember last time Luminosity did something.
I mean, aside from the one CS:GO dynasty in 2016, which doesn't really count for the conversation at hand, I don't think they've done anything in Siege. I think it is worth
Yeah,
noting as
I
well
don't
with
think so.
Luminosity that they did lose Mossyzilla and Vivid
True.
after
Yeah.
EWC, who both went to C9 Beast Coast. So there is going to be a little bit of growing pains there, although I do rate Sublik as a coach. Or at least I want to see if he could prove himself, which I think he has the capability to do. And Froshi won a
Mhm.
major, so there's definitely something good going on there, but it is going to take them a little bit of time to get used to things. And so far, not a bad start, especially after how things looked during Wildcard restart.
Yep.
Speaking of Wildcard, though, Bay and Spiff have been interesting to me because Bay's honestly kind of outperformed my expectations a little bit because I thought he was going to be good, but he has done a lot better than I thought he would, where Spiff's kind of been the reverse, where I thought he was going to do better than he has been doing.
Yeah. So we already kind of touched upon that earlier when I was like running over their current numbers as far as rating entries and overall kill death
Uh-oh.
on that team overall. So right now, definitely looking at him and just being very happy with his current performance. I mean, he's again not putting up crazy numbers. He's hovering at a 1.07 if you don't remember that from earlier. So clearly, he's still doing very well. He's kind of being a bit more of that support role, not exactly being the main entry, I would say, but it's like definitely gonna have to still kind of figure things out because they've went against two very tough teams in both Sonics and M80 and lost both of those in pretty tight contests. I mean, first one was a bit closer, but regardless, still, again, looking at Spiff, you already mentioned it earlier, I think, before we started. He's being a bit more of the voice of the team than he was before. So, I mean, that kind of gonna have to still look at him and be like, all right, we've seen what you can do. I need you to perform just a little bit better instead of just absolutely tanking it so far through these first two games.
Yeah, I mean, I do think part of that is like, I mean, so just kind of clarify, when we say the voice of the team, we don't necessarily mean the IGL, because it's going to be a combination of like Bosco and Spiker most likely, but he
Yeah,
is
a
a
bit of
player that
both.
we know is very vocal from his time on teams like Astralis and like Aerial Rise Academy, since both those teams would kind of demand a very vocal player in order to work well. And well, we saw what Aerial Rise Academy did, and Astralis was top 4 in the world after for Smith's first tournament.
Hmm.
But just like being kind of like vocal on that entry role is very difficult for some people just because it is like a lot going on at once, especially since it looks like he's kind of supposed to be the spearhead out of him and Bay, which we know he can do, but it is kind of weird to get used to. And Sonics and M80 are not the teams that I want to open with when I'm trying to adjust to that role on my new team, because those guys are going to be really good competition, right? We've seen
Yeah.
strategically SQ's looked really good, and having to kind of call against that while also being the first guy in is really not going to make your stats look pretty at all. And then M80 is just on fire these first two play days. There's a really
Yep.
good argument to be made for them being the best team in North America right now.
I mean, yeah, I mean, he still had a very tough contest against St. Nine Beast Coast, but I mean, still proving to be really good against even like the former major winners in the most recent stage. So, still looking at all of them and expecting a lot of big things out of them. Currently, the only teams that have 2 wins so far for the NAL stage are Sonics, SSG, and then M80. So, looking at them, really expecting a lot of big things, especially after they've all made really big roster moves in most recent weeks. So, overall, I think you're right. Definitely, very first two couple of games, not exactly what you want when you're the kind of a more fresh team than you were previously. So, I mean, but still, Wildcard have already shown that they can have some growing pains. Because, I mean, considering that in Element, they lost their very first game with Spiff against Upper Decky. And it was in kind of slightly embarrassing fashion, considering I think they were up 5-1 against him on Clubhouse and then lost the rest of the rounds. Could be wrong. It may have been 4-2. I can't exactly remember. It's been a few weeks now because that was a long, like tournament. But regardless, still, it's been rough. Needless to say, for Wildcard, whenever they made a roster change in most recent weeks. So I mean, it's not always going to be pretty. So it's definitely going to be expected, but still, it is slightly concerning that a guy that you picked up to be a big fragger, to be a voice, to just kind of help out the IGLs more or less, is performing as badly as he is for the first 2 games. Because I mean, sure, yeah, if you have one bad game, whatever. If you have 2 bad games, That's a bit of a sign of concern, especially on the entries where he's 2-6. So that's like 8 engagements, and he's only won 2 of them, and he's not able to really impact the round outside of that.
There's also like a lot of operators like Deimos that you do kind of want to keep alive for a bit.
Hmm.
And like 8 entry engagements is a not insubstantial amount of the rounds that his team has played so far. It's like when you're putting him on when you're putting him on those roles, and when you kind of pick him up as a vocal entry, you want him to stay alive longer, both so the utility can be used, and also because he's probably going to be the one they mainly want to like set up, like the things like the calls are going to happen in the early rounds. And when he's like dead, it's a little bit hard to do that as fluidly. Although I would imagine like Spiff isn't the kind of guy that's just gonna, cash in a check and play out the whole stage. I'd imagine they're gonna get better over time.
Hmm.
Bay though has looked really good for them. There have been a couple rounds we've seen like Spiff will get like fried, then Bay like just runs around the corner and has the immediate trade, which is from a second entry pretty damn good to see, especially since it's been like semi-consistent. If they can work on that chemistry, that could really go somewhere.
Yeah, just kind of need to iron out some things and just try to figure out what exactly is the problem. Because I mean, again, first 2 days of the season, first 2 days of the stage, it's kind of whatever. I mean, like you're gonna win some games, lose some games. You hope to at least win one of them, so at least you have a couple of points under your belt. But unfortunately didn't get that. So now you're going to have to be even more better for the rest of the stage, considering if you don't want to have to play through the gauntlet that is the open quals or closed quals, even for major, it's definitely not exactly a place you want to start off. But I mean, we've seen teams kind of be in a poor position. I mean, I think Beast Coast was in a similar spot where they didn't do nearly as well as they did in the first couple of games, and then they brought it back and still came in first place at the very end of the quals. So still a lot of things that can change for Wildcard, but I mean, certain players and certain individuals on that team still need to kind of step it up. I mean, outside of Spiff himself, I mean, Forrest as well. But wait, that doesn't seem right. Hold on, what?
Yeah, they
I
took it
well,
on
sorry,
Astralis.
I looked at Wildcard Gaming on CGG and I just saw Forrest on here. I'm like, wait, hold on, what? That doesn't make any sense. That regardless, there whoever is outside of Spiker and Kansan, forget now I'm suddenly forgetting the last guy's name, but whoever that is, I mean what Bosco. Okay. It must be Bosco, because that's
It is
the only
Bosco.
other person. It probably is Bosco. I don't know what CGG is smoking right now, but there you go. Bosco, I mean, he is more the support player, but he does kind of need to step it up because, I mean, 8 for 16, 1 for 2 on entry. That's not exactly the
Mm-hmm.
greatest. So, I mean, still, you don't expect him to be putting up big numbers, but still need to have him be a bit more impactful in his overall presence.
Yeah, we'll kind of see how that goes.
Yeah.
I do kind of expect like a little bit of a Beast Coast situation where like they started off 0-3 in stage one, Beast Coast did, and then they kind of took that and they sat down and kind of thought about like why aren't things working? What needs to be done? What are we doing wrong? And then they swapped some
Yep.
things around, and then they lit the world on fire and they beat DZ without Bolo doing a single point of damage. And Wildcard, they have the potential to do something like that. They do have Meepy as a coach who is really, really good. There was an argument to be made for him being one of the best in the world for a period of time before he kind of fell off the
Yep.
face of the planet after Koi, which I'm sure gave some Rogue
Don't
fans a
don't
little bit
remind
of
me.
pain in their soul.
Don't remind me.
Um, But he is someone who is going to be able to take kind of the things that are going wrong and adapt that into some solutions before the next game. Because the next games are Thursday, I believe, which is a decent bit of time for all these teams to just sit down and figure out like what went wrong, what went right. How do we reinforce what went right? How do we kind of fix what went wrong? Or like, do we just need to change things up completely? We'll kind of see.
Yeah, it's just a matter of trying to fix those issues. I mean, that just goes for any team. You're always trying to seek perfection, even if it's going to be pretty much impossible. So just try to figure out some of those issues, especially for some of the teams who are just kind of bouncing back from really poor performance in stage one, looking to do a lot better this time around. So, I mean, overall, I think there could be worse positions that you're in because the first 2 games were pretty close against again, some of the top teams in the league currently. So you could be in a worse spot. So I mean, they could easily get a win against Oxygen, who are looking really poor at the moment. It's not looking nearly as synergized. And then even with if DZ plays the way they did on Skyscraper in their very first game, I could see Wildcard still picking up a win out of that. That's just a matter of if DZ figures out their issues in the next week. So we'll have to see there. But overall, again, Wildcard aren't in a horrible spot. It's just definitely going to be a tough uphill battle if they continue to still have these struggles with some of these bottom end players.
So since we've kind of gone over that, let me pull up our notes again real quick. TPL Rush. It's right around the corner. The qualifiers started yesterday. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch them because I was too busy having a mental breakdown watching the NAL after a certain team with a certain new pickup played. If you were looking at my Twitter last night, you were kind of seeing what I was talking about a little bit. But TPL Rush right around the corner. The close quals for the quals are tomorrow, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see how this one kind of goes, especially since there's some behind the scenes stuff that Stan's given us permission to talk about.
Yep.
But I believe they also put a Twitter thread just kind of going over how a lot of the event works, because I think they did change things a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a different format considering that there's no invited teams this time around. So everyone has to work their way in through the qualifier system, which we're not seeing a lot of the big names in Xenon or even Element aside of Aerial Arise, who I think are one of the only teams who have actually just kind of played in those two most recent seasons to actually appear in here. So that's definitely a bit of a disappointment to say the least. I mean, but otherwise, still good to see some top teams come try to fight their way through. I think we've already seen a couple of them try to qualify in, but regardless, as well as top of that, it's going to be a GSL format. So I think it's going to be, as soon as we get 8 qualified teams, be spread across 2 groups of GSL, 2 wins qualifies you for playoffs, 2 losses eliminates you, and the 2 winning teams will move on to playoffs. So just overall, just try to fight your way through, see what you can do, because this is going to be a very quick tournament from what I can tell from talking to both Stan and Tabled about this. So even then, it's going to be basically just a semifinal and a grand final, and then basically we are done on top of that.
It is called Rush.
It is a rush. They're trying to get through this as fast as possible because it's jam-packed in the middle of a pro league season. So, I mean, and major quals on top of that. So, I mean, people are prioritizing on a lot of different things right now. So let's just focus on trying to get this done, see what kind of big names you can put yourself out there for, especially some of these smaller teams that may still have a chance since we don't have all those names trying to fight through the qualifiers as well. So if you're a lower end team, you could qualify in and see what you can do and possibly win big prizes. So, I mean, hey, it's no real big argument there.
So I think the most interesting change from me, since I'm a caster now and not a competitor, is that Tabled was kind of telling me when I met him a little bit ago, in person, by the way, which is kind of funny, that they're looking at doing more consistent duos for casters, because it's something that we've seen a lot inside of Tier 2 and Tier 1, where it's Sirius and Happy, Light Rose and Jazzman, Crow and Fellow, you look at them as duos, but in T3, it's a lot of Aliossz is available and Bianca's available, so slam them together.
Just throw them together. Or Happy. Because he's the one who has to constantly throw these schedules together. So I'm sure it's been a nightmare for him. I hope he gets compensated for therapy at some point. So
Stan, you get on that. Andrew as well, actually.
Anyone, really.
Yeah, having dedicated casting duos that would be kind of interesting, as it is easier to build chemistry. And I know for me, I think one of the things that is really interesting about my casting style is that I like to do banter, and I'm pretty good at it, but it's harder to do that when you don't have as much chemistry with someone. Because with Red Rogue, I've done it pretty well, pretty consistently, because he and I have casted together a lot. We have a good sense of how the other works, and so I kind of know how to do that. Or with Light Rose, because we're really good friends. But if you throw me with Bianca, I don't know her as well. She's a fine caster, but it's harder to do that sort of thing. and it's hard to like build consistent chemistry. And so the consistent duos hopefully should be interesting. And in case you're wondering, no, I don't know who I'm going to be put with yet.
I don't even know either, and I'm put myself available on the schedule. So I mean, I'm already got my dedicated duo in tier 2. So I mean, I'm not exactly worried about it. Probably just going to be more of a building up, try to experience with some of the like lesser experienced talent in tier 3. So we'll see how it goes there. But I mean, regardless, like you said, having a dedicated duo does allow you that like kind of leverage to be able to just focus in on your casting, especially with your duo. Because me and Happy, I mean, we started work on TPL season 8, just trying to work on getting more comfortable together through all that. So, that was basically as soon as I found out I even had an opportunity. So it was just focusing on what kind of mistakes am I making in my casting? Let me try to fix that. Move on. Okay, that's kind of just gives you the opportunity to do that, and then also just allows you to be a lot more comfortable too, because you already know the person very well. So I mean, like you said, banter is a very big important thing. I mean, I know me and Happy tried to do quite a bit of that as much as we could, just to be sure to be. It's like, because it's not always great to just be speaking all numbers and just be like blah, and now all of a sudden this team has done this, and then now they're all dead. Okay, round
Yeah.
over. Like
Especially if it's a
not
bad
always.
game.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun to have banter with a bad game than it is to just be like just suffering through it with the audience. It's not good for a broadcast. So I mean, we'll have to see. I think it would be very interesting if we can actually get that to work, because I think you've already kind of alluded to it. Aliossz is available. Let's just throw him in, because that's sometimes just how it works in tier 3. It's just suddenly nobody's available, and now we just have to throw people together because we have no other choice. So I
Yeah.
mean, it
And
definitely sucks in that regard.
And from Happy's perspective, scheduling, something he kind of told me about was like he has to keep mental lists of like, all right, so Alios good with Red Roke and T-Van, but isn't so
Mhm.
good at casting with like Meat Garage, just as an example, no shade to him. And then like Yali doesn't have as much chemistry with Red Roke and has really good chemistry with Bianca, and he kind of has to do that for like every caster.
Yeah.
Whereas if
On
it was
top of
like,
remembering what their roles are,
yeah,
typically.
exactly. Whereas if it was like, all right, Bianca and Yali are a duo, Alios and Red Rook are a duo, like T-Van and Chaka, then it's like, well, I need like a casting duo for this day, so let's just throw like the Bianca Yali. Then this day it's like, right, like it would make his job easier.
Mhm.
Just as a scheduler, and it would make my job easier,
Yeah.
since I can actually work at getting chemistry with a consistent duo, and it makes your kind of job as the audience easier because the casting is just better when it's consistent. So, like, to me, that's going to be the most impactful change, right? Which for the players, probably not going to care a whole lot, but that's not really the realm I operate in anymore. Is I have become reformed, as they say.
Yeah. We don't necessarily they don't necessarily care about what we have to say half the time anyway, so it's just but kind of whatever. But, I think it'll definitely make for a better show and overall just better experience for just everything, because I mean, like if the two people who really like working together, like it was for me and Happy in tier 3 or element 3. I don't know why I almost said tier 3, but regardless, just having that comfortable just kind of friendship with those people is going to be very good, because I mean, you can just like talk about video games like you should enjoy, because it's a very fun hobby to have if you're just doing it for fun instead of as a job like I do it nowadays. So I mean, just overall, it's going to be very good. It's going to be a very fun experiment. If we can get it to work, that's going to be the most important thing, is getting it to work, because I mean, as always, there's going to be complications that we're always going to have to figure out, just depending on what circumstances are thrown at us. So I think overall, just dedicated duos, I think is going to be a very fun idea. And then just overall for the actual event itself, I think it's going to be a very fun idea to just try out this GSL bracket type thing, just see how that works. Because I mean, for a while we were kind of just running through the gauntlet of,
Yep.
oh, it's another Swiss stage, because Element did it first and then everybody copied them afterwards. It's like,
Yeah. I
all
think
right,
it was
we're
STS before
finally.
that even.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was just like the exact same thing for like a year or two. So I'm finally glad to see that at least some of these different organizers are trying out different things. Not necessarily all of them have been great. I mean, just always there's always going to be like bad things about like the way you run something, because I mean like group stage has their whole thing of like, oh well, it doesn't really work for best of threes, is what I've heard quite often from like Andrew or Stan or something like that. It's always just kind of that thing of you got to find what works and then just go with that. So I mean, but at least now we're getting something different.
Yeah, it should be very, very interesting to see. It's actually,
Mhm.
I think, one of the few formats I haven't played in, so I would be interested to kind of hear how it is from the perspective of a player, which, maybe future episode.
Mhm.
We'll see. Just kind of like thinking about it right now, a lot of this has been very like production oriented because that is the realm in which Sirius and I exist, is like the behind the scenes, like the casting stuff. So, provided we both have the time to keep doing this and don't spontaneously explode, we probably will look at getting, some players on here eventually. And they also like to just say funny, mean words to other people. So that is also usually fun to have, but they can give an interesting perspective.
Yeah. I mean, especially if we get like JJ, for example, I'm sure we could just let him yap about how everybody else sucks. That's just, I would imagine that's along the lines of
Oh,
how it
yeah.
would go. But I mean,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
but I mean, I think we've already heard like some people kind of like say like something about like how I think the most recent format for Xenon, they didn't necessarily love the best of ones.
Yeah.
So I think that's a kind of a fair argument, because I mean, like, sure, best of ones are better for getting through things a lot faster, because running a tier three or organ oh, I can't talk all of a sudden. But tier three event for a long extended period of time isn't always great, because like some of the lower end teams, I don't know if you've noticed in the past, have always just kind of like, if they don't do well, disband.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at least, especially in Genesis, like way back in the day, like some teams like did not perform well for the first two games and then just exploded. So we don't want that.
Yep.
So like keeping it small and concise enough that we can get through things fast enough, so that way we can have a good event, still have the good teams around, so that way they don't lose players, is always the, I think, optimal thing. So it's just kind of finding that balance between what works for what the players like to see, what works best for like what an audience wants to see, and then what actually works feasibly for production to do.
Yeah, it's always kind of a three-way tug of war whenever you do stuff like that, and someone ends up being unhappy at the end of the day. I know with one season of TPL, I had to cast till 1 in the morning, which was a hell of an experience. It was also my first time working with Red Rogue, so as I'm trying to
Oh,
get used to this guy, it's also 12:30 a.m. And SSG Academy is throwing round after round after round.
oh
So
God.
it happens on occasion. So we have been going for about an hour. I think we talked about kind of everything we wanted to. Is there anything else
Yeah.
you kind of want to bring up before we end it
I
off?
mean, I think that's kind of it, because we've already hit the big kind of chunks of what we wanted to discuss. So I
Yeah,
mean, like, hey, yeah, it's already first episode. We've got through everything. So hey, there you go.
we've survived.
We've done it. We didn't explode. That's the important thing.
Now, if we get to 3 episodes, we beat the podcast I had with Fiend. Or really, we beat the podcast I had with Fiend if we can record the third episode with audio, because he didn't do that, and we yapped with Ozone for the 2 fucking hours, and it was
Oh
just
my
a silent
God.
movie because he forgot to like turn his microphone on. It was awful, mainly because there was a lot of interesting discussion that happened that would have been very relevant at the time, that just like didn't end up happening. Like we talked about like the admitting of Element 1 and kind of some of the controversies with
Oh,
that. And
that's a big one.
yeah, we had a really interesting discussion about it that had, I think, a lot of talking points that only became more relevant as like the FMG situation continued to unfold.
Yeah.
But Fiends doesn't know how technology works, so unfortunately never ended up happening. But with that being said, I think this is kind of a good place to end. So
Yeah.
thank you to anyone who watched this far. It's appreciated. I think we'd have like people's or both of our socials on here, or like in the description or somewhere. So you should check you should check everyone out, because obviously I think I'm pretty good at
I
what
think
I
I'm just
do.
okay.
And
I think
then,
I'm just okay.
this guy, good friend of mine, very good caster. Absolutely check him out. But until next time, I think it's where we end it.
Yeah.